Abe Lincoln's Anecdotes and Stories by R.D. Wordsworth, Part 1. A fun-loving and humor-loving man. It was once said of Shakespeare that the great mind that conceived the tragedies of Hamlet, Macbeth, etc., would have lost its reason if it had not found vent in the sparkling humor of such comedies as The Merry Wives of Windsor and The Comedy of Errors. The great strain on the mind of Abraham Lincoln, produced by 4 years of Civil War, might likewise have overcome his reason had it not found vent in the yarns and stories he constantly told. No more fun-loving or humor-loving man than Abraham Lincoln ever lived. He enjoyed a joke even when it was on himself, and probably, while he got his greatest enjoyment from telling stories, he had a keen appreciation of the humor in those that were told him. Matrimonial advice. For a while during the Civil War, General Fremont was without a command. One day, in discussing Fremont's case with George W. Julian, President Lincoln said he did not know where to place him, and that it reminded him of the old man who advised his son to take a wife, to which the young man responded, "All right, whose wife shall I take?" A slow horse. On one occasion, when Mr. Lincoln was going to attend a political convention, one of his rivals, a liveryman, provided him with a slow horse, hoping that he would not reach his destination in time. Mr. Lincoln got there, however, and when he returned with the horse, he said, "You keep this horse for funerals, don't you?" "Oh, no," replied the liveryman. "Well, I'm glad of that, for if you did, you'd never get a corpse to the grave in time for the resurrection." A vain general. In an interview between President Lincoln and Petroleum V. Nasby, the name came up of a recently deceased politician of Illinois whose merit was blemished by great vanity. His funeral was very largely attended. If General Blank had known how big a funeral he would have had, said Mr. Lincoln, he would have died years ago. Had confidence in him, but General Blank asks for more men, said Secretary of War Stanton to the President one day, showing the latter a telegram from the commander named, appealing for reinforcements. "I guess he's killed off enough men, hasn't he?" queried the President. "I don't mean Confederates, our own men. What's the use in sending volunteers down to him if they're only used to fill graves?" His dispatch seems to imply that, in his opinion, you have not the confidence in him he thinks he deserves, the War Secretary went on to say, as he looked over the telegram again. "Oh," was the President's reply, "he needn't lose any of his sleep on that account. Just telegraph him to that effect. Also, that I don't propose to send him any more men." Hardtack better than generals. Secretary of War Stanton told the President the following story, which greatly amused the latter, as he was especially fond of a joke at the expense of some high military or civil dignitary. Stanton had little or no sense of humor. When Secretary Stanton was making a trip up the Broad River in North Carolina in a tugboat, a Federal picket yelled out, "What have you got on board of that tug?" The severe and dignified answer was, "The Secretary of War and Major General Foster." Instantly the picket roared back, "We've got Major Generals enough up here. Why don't you bring us up some hardtack?" Douglas held Lincoln's hat. When Mr. Lincoln delivered his first inaugural, he was introduced by his friend, United States Senator E.D. Baker of Oregon. He carried a cane and a little roll, the manuscript of his inaugural address. There was a moment's pause after the introduction, as he vainly looked for a spot where he might place his high silk hat. Stephen A. Douglas, the political antagonist of his whole public life, the man who had pressed him hardest in the campaign of 1860, was seated just behind him. Douglas stepped forward quickly and took the hat which Mr. Lincoln held helplessly in his hand. "If I can't be president," Douglas whispered smilingly to Mrs. Brown, a cousin of Mrs. Lincoln and a member of the president's party, "I at least can hold his hat." His passes to Richmond not honored. A man called upon the President and solicited a pass for Richmond. "Well," said the President, "I would be very happy to oblige, if my passes were respected. But the fact is, sir, I have, within the past 2 years, given passes to 250,000 men to go to Richmond, and not one has got there yet." The applicant quietly and respectfully withdrew on his tiptoes. Lincoln as a dancer. Lincoln made his first appearance in society when he was first sent to Springfield, Illinois, as a member of the state legislature. It was not an imposing figure which he cut in a ballroom, but still he was occasionally to be found there. Miss Mary Todd, who afterward became his wife, was the magnet which drew the tall, awkward young man from his den. One evening Lincoln approached Miss Todd and said in his peculiar idiom, "Miss Todd, I should like to dance with you the worst way." The young woman accepted the inevitable and hobbled around the room with him. When she returned to her seat, one of her companions asked mischievously, "Well, Mary, did he dance with you the worst way?" "Yes," she answered, "the very worst." Loved soldiers' humor. Lincoln loved anything that savored of wit or humor among the soldiers. He used to relate 2 stories to show, he said, that neither death nor danger could quench the grim humor of the American soldier. A soldier of the Army of the Potomac was being carried to the rear of battle with both legs shot off, who, seeing a pie woman, called out, "Say, old lady, are them pies sewed or pegged?" And there was another one of the soldiers at the Battle of Chancellorsville, whose regiment, waiting to be called into the fight, was taking coffee. The hero of the story put to his lips a crockery mug, which he had carried with care through several campaigns. A stray bullet, just missing the drinker's head, dashed the mug into fragments and left only the handle on his finger. Turning his head in that direction, he scowled, "Johnny, you can't do that again." Wanted to borrow the army. During one of the periods when things were at a standstill, the Washington authorities, being unable to force General McClellan to assume an aggressive attitude, President Lincoln went to the general's headquarters to have a talk with him, but for some reason he was unable to get an audience. Mr. Lincoln returned to the White House much disturbed at his failure to see the commander of the Union forces, and immediately sent for 2 general officers to have a consultation. On their arrival, he told them he must have someone to talk to about the situation, and as he had failed to see General McClellan, he wished their views as to the possibility or probability of commencing active operations with the Army of the Potomac. "Something's got to be done," said the president emphatically, "and done right away, or the bottom will fall out of the whole thing. Now, if McClellan doesn't want to use the army for a while, I'd like to borrow it from him and see if I can't do something or other with it. If McClellan can't fish, he ought at least to be cutting bait at a time like this." Fixed up a bit for the city folks. Mrs. Lincoln knew her husband was not pretty, but she liked to have him presentable when he appeared before the public. Stephen Fiske, in When Lincoln Was First Inaugurated, tells of Mrs. Lincoln's anxiety to have the president-elect smoothed down a little when receiving a delegation that was to greet them upon reaching New York City. "The train stopped," writes Mr. Fiske, "and through the windows immense crowds could be seen, the cheering drowning the blowing off of steam of the locomotive. Then Mrs. Lincoln opened her handbag and said, 'Abraham, I must fix you up a bit for these city folks.' Mr. Lincoln gently lifted her upon the seat before him. She parted, combed, and brushed his hair, and arranged his black necktie. 'Do I look nice now, Mother?' he affectionately asked. 'Well, you'll do, Abraham,' replied Mrs. Lincoln critically. So he kissed her and lifted her down from the seat, and turned to meet Mayor Wood, courtly and suave, and to have his hand shaken by the other New York officials. Find out for yourselves. Several of us lawyers, remarked one of his colleagues, in the eastern end of the circuit, annoyed Lincoln once while he was holding court for Davis by attempting to defend against a note to which there were many makers. We had no legal, but a good moral defense, but what we wanted most of all was to stave it off till the next term of court by one expedient or another. We bothered the court about it till late on Saturday, the day of adjournment. He adjourned for supper with nothing left but this case to dispose of. After supper he heard our twaddle for nearly an hour, and then made this odd entry: L.D. Chadden versus J.D. Beasley et al., April term, 1856, Champaign County Court. Plea in abatement by B.Z. Green, a defendant not served, filed Saturday at 11 o'clock a.m., April 24, 1856. Stricken from the files by order of court. Demurrer to declaration, if there ever was one, overruled. Defendants who are served now, at 8 o'clock p.m. of the last day of the term, ask to plead to the merits, which is denied by the court on the ground that the offer comes too late, and therefore, as by nil dicet, judgment is rendered for PLFF, clerk, assess damages, A. Lincoln, Judge pro tem. The lawyer who reads this singular entry will appreciate its oddity if no one else does. After making it, one of the lawyers, on recovering from his astonishment, ventured to inquire, "Well, Lincoln, how can we get this case up again?" Lincoln eyed him quizzically for a moment, and then answered, "You have all been so mighty smart about this case, you can find out how to take it up again yourselves." Cold molasses was swifter. Old Pap, as the soldiers called General George H. Thomas, was aggravatingly slow at a time when the president wanted him to get a move on. In fact, the gallant Rock of Chickamauga was evidently entered in a snail race. "Some of my generals are so slow," regretfully remarked Lincoln one day, "that molasses in the coldest days of winter is a racehorse compared to them. They're brave enough, but somehow or other they get fastened in a fence corner and can't figure their way out." Don't kill him with your fist. Ward Layman, Marshal of the District of Columbia during Lincoln's time in Washington, was a powerful man. His strength was phenomenal, and a blow from his fist was like unto that coming from the business end of a sledge. Layman tells this story, the hero of which is not mentioned by name, but in all probability his identity can be guessed. On one occasion, when the fears of the loyal element of the city, Washington, were excited to fever heat, a free fight near the old National Theater occurred about 11 o'clock one night. An officer, in passing the place, observed what was going on, and seeing the great number of persons engaged, he felt it to be his duty to command the peace. The imperative tone of his voice stopped the fighting for a moment, but the leader, a great bully, roughly pushed back the officer and told him to go away, or he would whip him. The officer again advanced and said, "I arrest you," attempting to place his hand on the man's shoulder, when the bully struck a fearful blow at the officer's face. This was parried and instantly followed by a blow from the fist of the officer, striking the fellow under the chin and knocking him senseless. Blood issued from his mouth, nose, and ears. It was believed that the man's neck was broken. A surgeon was called, who pronounced the case a critical one, and the wounded man was hurried away on a litter to the hospital. There the physician said there was concussion of the brain, and that the man would die. All the medical skill the officer could procure was employed in the hope of saving the life of the man. His conscience smote him for having, as he believed, taken the life of a fellow creature, and he was inconsolable. Being on terms of intimacy with the president, about 2 o'clock that night, the officer went to the White House, woke up Mr. Lincoln, and requested him to come into his office, where he told him his story. Mr. Lincoln listened with great interest until the narrative was completed, and then asked a few questions, after which he remarked, "I am sorry you had to kill the man, but these are times of war, and a great many men deserve killing. This one, according to your story, is one of them, so give yourself no uneasiness about the matter. I will stand by you." "That is not why I came to you. I knew I did my duty, and had no fears of your disapproval of what I did," replied the officer, and then he added, "Why I came to you was, I felt great grief over the unfortunate affair, and I wanted to talk to you about it." Mr. Lincoln then said with a smile, placing his hand on the officer's shoulder, "You go home now and get some sleep, but let me give you this piece of advice. Hereafter, when you have occasion to strike a man, don't hit him with your fist. Strike him with a club, a crowbar, or with something that won't kill him." And here I am. An old acquaintance of the president visited him in Washington. Lincoln desired to give him a place. Thus encouraged, the visitor, who was an honest man, but wholly inexperienced in public affairs or business, asked for a high office, superintendent of the mint. The president was aghast and said, "Good gracious, why didn't he ask to be the Secretary of the Treasury and have done with it?" Afterward he said, "Well now, I never thought Mr. Blank had anything more than average ability when we were young men together, but then I suppose he thought the same thing about me, and here I am." Praises his rival for office. When Mr. Lincoln was a candidate for the legislature, it was the practice at that date in Illinois for two rival candidates to travel over the district together. The custom led to much good-natured raillery between them, and in such contests Lincoln was rarely, if ever, worsted. He could even turn the generosity of a rival to account by his whimsical treatment. On one occasion, says Mr. Weir, a former resident of Sangamon County, he had driven out from Springfield in company with a political opponent to engage in joint debate. The carriage, it seems, belonged to his opponent. In addressing the gathering of farmers that met them, Lincoln was lavish in praise of the generosity of his friend. "I am too poor to own a carriage," he said, "but my friend has generously invited me to ride with him. I want you to vote for me if you will, but if not, then vote for my opponent, for he is a fine man." His extravagant and persistent praise of his opponent appealed to the sense of humor in his rural audience, to whom his inability to own a carriage was by no means a disqualification. Had to wait for him. President Lincoln, having arranged to go to New York, was late for his train, much to the disgust of those who were to accompany him, and all were compelled to wait several hours until the next train steamed out of the station. President Lincoln was much amused at the dissatisfaction displayed, and then ventured the remark that the situation reminded him of a little story. Said he, "Out in Illinois, a convict who had murdered his cellmate was sentenced to be hanged. On the day set for the execution, crowds lined the roads leading to the spot where the scaffold had been erected, and there was much jostling and excitement. The condemned man took matters coolly, and as one batch of perspiring, anxious men rushed past the cart in which he was riding, he called out, 'Don't be in a hurry, boys. You've got plenty of time. There won't be any fun until I get there.'" "That's the condition of things now," concluded the president. "There won't be any fun at New York until I get there." Make something out of it anyway. From the day of his nomination by the Chicago Convention, gifts poured in upon Lincoln. Many of these came in the form of wearing apparel. Mr. George Lincoln of Brooklyn, who brought to Springfield in January 1861 a handsome silk hat to the president-elect, the gift of a New York hatter, told some friends that in receiving the hat, Lincoln laughed heartily over the gifts of clothing, and remarked to Mrs. Lincoln, "Well, wife, if nothing else comes out of this scrape, we are going to have some new clothes, are we not?" Sorry for the horses. When President Lincoln heard of the Confederate raid at Fairfax, in which a brigadier general and a number of valuable horses were captured, he gravely observed, "Well, I am sorry for the horses." "Sorry for the horses, Mr. President?" exclaimed the Secretary of War, raising his spectacles and throwing himself back in his chair in astonishment. "Yes," replied Mr. Lincoln, "I can make a brigadier general in 5 minutes, but it is not easy to replace 110 horses." Noise like a turnip. "Every man has his own peculiar and particular way of getting at and doing things," said President Lincoln one day, "and he is often criticized because that way is not the one adopted by others. The great idea is to accomplish what you set out to do. When a man is successful in whatever he attempts, he has many imitators, and the methods used are not so closely scrutinized, although no man who is of good intent will resort to mean, underhanded, scurvy tricks. That reminds me of a fellow out in Illinois who had better luck in getting prairie chickens than anyone in the neighborhood. He had a rusty old gun no other man dared to handle. He never seemed to exert himself, being listless and indifferent when out after game, but he always brought home all the chickens he could carry, while some of the others, with their finely trained dogs and latest improved fowling pieces, came home alone. "How is it, Jake?" inquired one sportsman, who, although a good shot and knew something about hunting, was often unfortunate, "that you never come home without a lot of birds?" Jake grinned, half closed his eyes, and replied, "Oh, I don't know that there's anything queer about it. I just go ahead and get 'em." "Yes, I know you do, but how do you do it?" "You'll tell." "Honest, Jake, I won't say a word. Hope to drop dead this minute. Never say nothing, if I tell you? Cross my heart 3 times. This reassured Jake, who put his mouth close to the ear of his eager questioner and said in a whisper, "All you got to do is just to hide in a fence corner and make a noise like a turnip. That'll bring the chickens every time." Let 6 skunks go. The president had decided to select a new war minister, and the leading Republican senators thought the occasion was opportune to change the whole 7 cabinet ministers. They therefore earnestly advised him to make a clean sweep and select 7 new men, and so restore the waning confidence of the country. The president listened with patient courtesy, and when the senators had concluded, he said, with a characteristic gleam of humor in his eye, "Gentlemen, your request for a change of the whole cabinet, because I have made one change, reminds me of a story I once heard in Illinois, of a farmer who was much troubled by skunks. His wife insisted on his trying to get rid of them. He loaded his shotgun one moonlit night and awaited developments. After some time the wife heard the shotgun go off, and in a few minutes the farmer entered the house. 'What luck have you?' asked she. 'I hid myself behind the woodpile,' said the old man, with the shotgun pointed towards the hen roost, and before long there appeared not 1 skunk, but 7. I took aim, blazed away, killed one, and he raised such a fearful smell that I concluded it was best to let the other 6 go. The senators laughed and retired." One thing Abe didn't love. Lincoln admitted that he was not particularly energetic when it came to real hard work. "My father," said he one day, "taught me how to work, but not to love it. I never did like to work, and I don't deny it. I'd rather read, tell stories, crack jokes, talk, laugh, anything but work." The man he was looking for. Judge Kelly of Pennsylvania, who was one of the committee to advise Lincoln of his nomination, and who was himself a great many feet high, had been eyeing Lincoln's lofty form with a mixture of admiration and possibly jealousy. This had not escaped Lincoln, and as he shook hands with the judge, he inquired, "What is your height?" 6'3". "What is yours, Mr. Lincoln?" 6'4". "Then," said the judge, "Pennsylvania bows to Illinois. My dear man, for years my heart has been aching for a president that I could look up to, and I've at last found him." Wanted Stanton spanked. Old Dennis Hanks was sent to Washington at one time by persons interested in securing the release from jail of several men accused of being copperheads. It was thought old Dennis might have some influence with the president. The latter heard Dennis's story and then said, "I will send for Mr. Stanton. It is his business." Secretary Stanton came into the room, stormed up and down, and said the men ought to be punished more than they were. Mr. Lincoln sat quietly in his chair and waited for the tempest to subside, and then quietly said to Stanton he would like to have the papers next day. When he had gone, Dennis said, "Abe, if I was as big and as ugly as you are, I would take him over my knee and spank him." The president replied, "No, Stanton is an able and valuable man for this nation, and I am glad to bear his anger for the service he can give the nation." 6'4" at 17. Abe's school teacher, Crawford, endeavored to teach his pupils some of the manners of the polite society of Indiana, 1823 or so. This was a part of his system. One of the pupils would retire and then come in as a stranger, and another pupil would have to introduce him to all the members of the school in what was considered good manners. As Abe wore a linsey-woolsey shirt, buckskin breeches which were too short and very tight, and low shoes, and was tall and awkward, he no doubt created considerable merriment when his turn came. He was growing at a fearful rate. He was 15 years of age, and 2 years later attained his full height of 6 feet 4 inches. Just like Seward, the First Corps of the Army, commanded by General Reynolds, was once reviewed by the President on a beautiful plain at the north of Potomac Creek, about 8 miles from Hooker's headquarters. The party rode thither in an ambulance over a rough corduroy road, and as they passed over some of the more difficult portions of the jolting way, the ambulance driver, who sat well in front, occasionally let fly a volley of suppressed oaths at his wild team of 6 mules. Finally, Mr. Lincoln, leaning forward, touched the man on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, my friend, are you an Episcopalian?" The man, greatly startled, looked around and replied, "No, Mr. President, I am a Methodist." "Well," said Lincoln, "I thought you must be an Episcopalian, because you swear just like Governor Seward, who is a church warden." Abe got the worst of it. When Lincoln was a young lawyer in Illinois, he and a certain judge once got to bantering one another about trading horses, and it was agreed that the next morning at 9 o'clock they should make a trade, the horses to be unseen up to that hour and no backing out, under a forfeiture of $25. At the hour appointed, the judge came up, leading the sorriest-looking specimen of a horse ever seen in those parts. In a few minutes Mr. Lincoln was seen approaching with a wooden sawhorse upon his shoulders. Great were the shouts and laughter of the crowd, and both were greatly increased when Lincoln, on surveying the judge's animal, set down his sawhorse and exclaimed, "Well, Judge, this is the first time I ever got the worst of it in a horse trade." He set him up. Immediately after Mr. Lincoln's nomination for president of the Chicago Convention, a committee, of which Governor Morgan of New York was chairman, visited him in Springfield, Illinois, where he was officially informed of his nomination. After this ceremony had passed, Mr. Lincoln remarked to the company that as a fit ending to an interview so important and interesting as that which had just taken place, he supposed good manners would require that he should treat the committee with something to drink. And opening the door that led into the rear, he called out, "Mary, Mary." A girl responded to the call, to whom Mr. Lincoln spoke a few words in an undertone, and, closing the door, returned again and talked with his guests. In a few minutes the maid entered, bearing a large waiter, containing several glass tumblers and a large pitcher, and placed them upon the center table. Mr. Lincoln arose, and gravely addressing the company, said, "Gentlemen, we must pledge our mutual health in the most healthy beverage that God has given to man. It is the only beverage I have ever used or allowed my family to use, and I cannot conscientiously depart from it on the present occasion. It is pure Adam's ale from the spring," and taking the tumbler, he touched it to his lips and pledged them his highest respects in a cup of cold water. Of course, all his guests admired his consistency and joined in his example. God with a little g. Abraham Lincoln, his hand and pen. He will be good, but God knows when. These lines were found written in young Lincoln's own hand at the bottom of a page whereon he had been ciphering. Lincoln always wrote a clear, regular fist. In this instance, he evidently did not appreciate the sacredness of the name of the deity when he used a little g. Lincoln once said he did not remember the time when he could not write. What ailed the boys? Mr. Rowland Diller, who was one of Mr. Lincoln's neighbors in Springfield, tells the following. "I was called to the door one day by the cries of children in the street, and there was Mr. Lincoln striding by with two of his boys, both of whom were wailing aloud. 'Why, Mr. Lincoln, what's the matter with the boys?' I asked. 'Just what's the matter with the whole world,' Lincoln replied. 'I've got 3 walnuts, and each wants 2. Major General, I reckon." At one time the President had the appointment of a large additional number of brigadier and major generals. Among the immense number of applications, Mr. Lincoln came upon one wherein the claims of a certain worthy, not in the service at all, for a generalship were glowingly set forth, but the applicant didn't specify whether he wanted to be brigadier or major general. The President observed this difficulty and solved it by a lucid endorsement. The clerk, on receiving the paper again, found written across its back, "Major General, I reckon, A. Lincoln." It tickled the little woman. Lincoln had been in the telegraph office at Springfield during the casting of the first and second ballots in the Republican National Convention at Chicago, and then left and went over to the office of the State Journal, where he was sitting conversing with friends while the third ballot was being taken. In a few moments came across the wires the announcement of the result. The superintendent of the telegraph company wrote on a scrap of paper, "Mr. Lincoln, you are nominated on the third ballot," and a boy ran with the message to Lincoln. He looked at it in silence, amid the shouts of those around him. Then rising and putting it in his pocket, he said quietly, "There's a little woman down at our house would like to hear this. I'll go down and tell her." He'd see it again. About 2 years before Lincoln was nominated for the presidency, he went to Bloomington, Illinois, to try a case of some importance. His opponent, who afterward reached a high place in his profession, was a young man of ability, sensible but sensitive, and one to whom the loss of a case was a great blow. He therefore studied hard and made much preparation. This particular case was submitted to the jury late at night, and although anticipating a favorable verdict, the young attorney spent a sleepless night in anxiety. Early next morning he learned, to his great chagrin, that he had lost the case. Lincoln met him at the courthouse some time after the jury had come in, and asked him what had become of his case. With lugubrious countenance And in a melancholy tone the young man replied, "It's gone to hell." "Oh, well," replied Lincoln, "then you will see it again." Sure cure for boils. President Lincoln and Postmaster General Blair were talking of the war. "Blair," said the president, "did you ever know that fright has sometimes proven a cure for boils?" "No, Mr. President. How was that?" "I'll tell you. Not long ago, when a colonel with his cavalry was at the front, and the Rebs were making things rather lively for us, the colonel was ordered out to a reconnaissance. He was troubled at the time with a big boil, where it made horseback riding decidedly uncomfortable. He finally dismounted and ordered the troops forward without him. Soon he was startled by the rapid reports of pistols and the helter-skelter approach of his troops in full retreat before a yelling rebel force. He forgot everything but the yells, sprang into his saddle, and made capital time over the fences and ditches till safe within the lines. The pain from his boil was gone, and the boil too, and the colonel swore that there was no cure for boils so sure as fright from rebel yells. Justice versus numbers. Lincoln was constantly bothered by members of delegations of goody-goodies who knew all about running the war, but had no inside information as to what was going on. Yet they poured out their advice in streams until the president was heartily sick of the whole business and wished the war would find some way to kill off these nuisances. "How many men have the Confederates now in the field?" asked one of these bores one day. "About 1,200,000, replied the president. "Oh my, not so many as that, surely, Mr. Lincoln." "They have fully 1,200,000, no doubt of it. You see, all of our generals, when they get whipped, say the enemy outnumbers them from 3 or 5 to 1, and I must believe them. We have 400,000 men in the field, and 3 times 4 make 12. Don't you see it? It is as plain to be seen as the nose on a man's face. And at the rate things are now going, with the great amount of speculation and the small crop of fighting, it will take a long time to overcome 1,200,000 rebels in arms. If they can get subsistence, they have everything else except a just cause. Yet it is said that thrice is he armed that hath his quarrel just. I am willing, however, to risk our advantage of thrice in justice against their thrice in numbers." Lincoln saw Stanton about it. Mr. Lovejoy, heading a committee of Western men, discussed an important scheme with the president, and the gentlemen were then directed to explain it to Secretary of War Stanton. Upon presenting themselves to the secretary and showing the president's order, the secretary said, "Did Lincoln give you an order of that kind?" "He did, sir." "Then he is a D fool," said the angry secretary. "Do you mean to say that the president is a D fool?" asked Lovejoy in amazement. "Yes, sir, if he gave you such an order as that." The bewildered Illinoisian betook himself at once to the president and related the result of the conference. "Did Stanton say I was a D fool?" asked Lincoln at the close of the recital. "He did, sir, and repeated it." After a moment's pause, and looking up, the president said, "If Stanton said I was a D fool, then I must be one, for he is nearly always right, and generally says what he means. I will slip over and see him." Sleep standing up. McClellan was a thorn in Lincoln's side, always up in the air, as the president put it, and yet he hesitated to remove him. The young Napoleon was a good organizer, but no fighter. Lincoln sent him everything necessary in the way of men, ammunition, artillery, and equipments, but he was forever unready. Instead of making a forward movement at the time expected, he would notify the president that he must have more men. These were given him as rapidly as possible, and then would come a demand for more horses, more this and that, usually winding up with a demand for still more men. Lincoln bore it all in patience for a long time, but one day, when he had received another request for more men, he made a vigorous protest. "If I gave McClellan all the men he asks for," said the president, "they couldn't find room to lie down. They'd have to sleep standing up." End of section 1.